Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, a little comparison video. My name is Hollow and I've been playing ARPGs on and off for some time now, but it wasn't until Diablo 4 that, I really committed to one, making it your main game all the way to max level and, trying everything the game has to offer. And while in that down period of the season, I thought I'd finally check out Path of Exile, since I'd only heard good things. I recorded that experience for a video and it ended up becoming an ongoing series on the channel now. And thankfully, I get a lot of viewer help because this game is very hard to get into. There's so much depth and detail, which is incredible once you understand it, but also so overwhelming and pretty intimidating for a new player. Overall though, I'm loving Path of Exile and I found that it does so many things better than Diablo 4, just as expected. However, it doesn't do everything better, that's for sure. And that brings us to the point of this video. What does Path of Exile do better compared to Diablo 4? And vice versa. I'm still a new player, but I've watched and read a lot, and I wanted to give that new perspective comparison and be honest about where both games are strong and weak. So with all that said, let's just get started. We begin with a PoE win that's undisputable. Absolutely insane fact that this game has existed for over a decade now and has provided massive update after update, league after league, new content, updating the old, and boasts one of the best endgames around, meaning it's a very well respected game for what it offers. And that is all for completely free. You can genuinely go to Steam right now and play it for free all the way. So no matter what else we talk about today, that's an incredible thing to say and a major boon for the game. It's always going to be worth trying if you're remotely interested. But now let's follow up on that, where the game is in fact not free because you're probably going to need to spend some money on it if you're going to commit to it. It's said that the stash kind of does its job for you until a certain point. Now, unlike Diablo 4, it offers a suitably sized stash to work with, but only up until a point. Eventually, you're drowning in currencies and items, especially when there's multiple characters you're actively playing in that mix. This is where the game kind of becomes no longer free because you feel like you kind of need to buy those stash tabs. They aren't just normal stash tabs though. One is this clever setup for your currencies, designed to be really smooth for that process. Another could be for trading with other players, which is apparently a game changer. It's a good idea to start on the current league since the economy is reset. Do you need to do these things? Well, I guess not, but every guide I've watched or read on the topic says that if you commit to the game long term, you're gonna want these eventually. And by the time that you hit that point where, okay, you're in the end game and it's relevant to you now, you've got so much value for completely free, I think it makes complete sense to support the game and get the big benefits of those tabs. They make the game free, right? And then they provide real quality of life options for money in exchange. I think that's totally fair. Meanwhile, with Diablo 4, I get this sinking feeling that Blizzard are going to try to attempt the same thing in their, by comparison, unfinished beta release of a AAA game that we've already had to pay a significant amount of money to even play in the first place, let alone the continual stuff they do, like battle passes per season. So this is a major win for Path of Exile. Let's change gear though. What about a way Diablo 4 actually wins over compared to Path of Exile? Well, there's one big one that we can acknowledge. Diablo 4 is a current gen game, and it's actually designed for new players, especially the casual player base. Therefore, their new player experience is, well, it's a lot better. You drop in, and before you know it, you've got a bunch of abilities to play around with, clear direction, quest to quest, and a very clear loot system because, to begin with, it's basically bigger number better. Whereas in PoE, pretty much immediately, you care about slots and certain stats, and it gets complicated pretty quick. In Diablo, you can pretty much just do the main quest and level really well, and even in the new season, it's very straightforward. The main new season mechanics, you just go unlock them, power them up, and then you're free to do whatever. I think Diablo 4 was much more intentionally designed to get new players into the game and get powered up and having fun as fast as possible. They've made that very easy. And another big aspect of how they've done that well is the ability to rework your build early. In Diablo 4, you start out with your skill tree, and that's pretty much it. And it's also a very simple skill tree compared to the meme and well-known skill tree thing that Path of Exile offers. A lot of people have said in the comments of videos I've made about Path of Exile that they tried the game and they opened the skill tree and they immediately quit. That's a whole other topic, but with Diablo 4, it's so simple. You have a couple basic attack options, then a core ability option. And how do you want to make these stronger? Do you want option A or B? And that's it. That's about as complicated as it gets. And if you're not sure, there's no downside. You can take the points back and try something new instantly. While you're low level, it's completely free, and when it's not free, it's so cheap that it's irrelevant. There's a lot to be said about how Diablo 4's skill tree and all that stuff is maybe overly simple and limited in its options, and how much of it doesn't even work, but let's stay focused. Path of Exile's experience for respecking and reworking a character when you've realized you spent your points wrong is pretty brutal and unforgiving. The advice I've got on this topic is if you've gone too far and you've made a mistake, it's better to remake a character and re-level than it is to respec. There are ways to refund your points, but it's too far and few between. As a new player, it is just best to restart. This concept is called bricking a character, and it happens to new players very commonly that aren't following guides, which is almost like a required thing. I think that's pretty terrible, and I don't understand how it's got to be this way or still is at this point in the game. I do think they could make some minor changes to make things a lot more forgiving for new players in Path of Exile, so credit to Diablo on that important concept. I think Diablo 4 is much better for new players. But let's go back to Path of Exile. While you might not have a reliable way to respec and rework a character early, you certainly do have much more freedom of choice. Forget the massive skill tree and all the options around that. Path of Exile boasts this incredible ability to take, say, a witch, a stereotypical caster, and then make them a full melee build. Maybe you'll do a mid-ground and go like a mage spellsword type, or maybe you'll just be literally an archer. You can do anything you like on any character because the skills aren't bound to the character. In Diablo, a necromancer is going to have necromantic abilities. Your only real choice then is of course to be a necromancer. Just kidding, you can't. Minion builds don't work in that game. They're still hilariously weak. You're more of a sorcerer that has necromancer themed spells. I'm still really bitter about that, but it highlights what I'm saying here. Path of Exile doesn't just work for its own class, which it has over Diablo, but the class can work as anything. The skills are from the gems that you're slotting into your gear. So if you're wearing that gem, you've got the skill. It simply works, while Diablo 4 remains a complete mess for the balance and class builds, with almost every class having half the core build concepts non-functional or entirely too weak. A lot of it still needs reworking, and they're doing that actively season to season, but when I bought that fully priced AAA game, somehow I thought they would have finished the game before releasing it. Speaking of builds though, here's a weird topic. Game-breaking builds. Diablo 4 just doesn't do this. At best, in the last season, we had the ultra-high damage options of Barbarian and Sorceress. What I'm really talking about here is the way you can completely break the limits of a character, where you're cleaving out, say, massive arcs that kill everything instantly, where you're moving so fast that you're blipping around like teleporting. Comical levels of power, where, when I watch this, I can barely see what's happening. You've beaten the game. And you can do that in PoE. Long-time players really like this concept, it would seem. There's a lot of discussion around losing that concept, and the fear of that in PoE too. And it's an important topic. I actually believe the devs have said they want players to still be able to do that in some form in the sequel, but I must admit this isn't appealing to me specifically. You can tell that it's an indie style game, a decade old. The VFX that's covering the screen is a bit much. To me, it doesn't really look fun. Like, I'm a brand new player, and when I see these breaking game concepts, I'm more confused about what I'm looking at, and I am wondering, is that actually fun? Maybe it's the journey to reach that power and not the end point that it's all about, but clearly I don't know because I've not tried it yet. For many people though, that's a major point for the true endgame, that the top % of players can manage that crazy stuff. It is pretty unique. Alright, let's come back down to earth for this one, a very simple one, loot filters. Path of Exile supports and allows outside modding, which means the player base can actively and often very quickly, compared to the devs, solve major issues. A loot filter system allows players to choose what loot drops are actually shown to them, resulting in a much easier experience, especially in the endgame. The hundreds of items that are completely useless to you, you don't even see them. You have absolute certainty then, because of your filter, that if you do get to see something, you know it's worth picking up and checking. The same cannot be said for Diablo 4 in any capacity. We continually still pick up everything, check everything manually, and decide if we need it. The answer, 99.9% of the time, is no, you don't need that item. So a massive amount of time playing the game is looking at items and vendoring them. For me, a loot filter seems like a core base feature for an ARPG. Now I've experienced one, and it is maddening to me that Diablo 4 doesn't have one. So that's a big win again for Path of Exile. What about another massive one though? The boss fights in PoE, even the elites, are so much more interesting. Each act has a final boss that you need to beat, and it demands you pay attention to a variety of mechanics. To start off, it's just adds and areas you don't want to be standing in, but then they layer more and more onto each new boss. Next, you've got this charge slam that you've got to avoid, or like area denial in the fight you're dealing with. Waves you can literally jump over, pinpoint explosions that center on you, move in and blast that you've got to avoid, all while dealing enough damage to win yourself, attacking the right targets to expose the boss or make the most of a DPS window. In many cases, before the fight, you need to make sure you've got enough health, armor, element resistance, and so on. You need to reach these minimum requirements to challenge it properly. There is a forgiving mechanic in the axe stuff specifically, because when you die, the boss is just at whatever health you put it at, so you come back and finish it off, but that's for story specifically, not endgame. Meanwhile, Diablo 4 bosses are just tank and spank. Maybe they get one mechanic if you're lucky, and it's pretty much just move around the boss and avoid it. They're all like that. Even the main story special bosses are so forgettable in their mechanics because they pose no threat to you. It wasn't until Season 2 that we actually got a roster of interesting bosses beyond just Lilith, but we're talking about the endgame there, not the campaign and the pre-endgame. So PoE does a way better job with the bosses and with the elites, and challenge you in pushing the difficulty from the start. Alright, that was a lot for PoE, let's do some for Diablo 4. A big one for me while I'm playing through PoE's story is the story portrayal, and how I don't think that's been very good. There's tablets that you can stop and listen to, NPCs with long lines of dialogue, details that you could benefit from if you stopped and listened and read. But I just think the way they show this to you is slow and pretty unimmersive. This has begun to change as I progress though. At Act 3, things began to take a turn into Act 4 and 5, minor spoiler warning, but the giant statue that was in Judgment right at the start when you're making a character, turns out that's a living thing, and there's a demon or something within it. After fighting your way back to the place you were exiled from, you end up unleashing this horrible monster accidentally and lose that fight and go back to the start in a new way. It's pretty clever, and something I somewhat missed the main details of as I went through the story. Meanwhile, Diablo 4's story was dark and engaging and shown through cinematic moments using in-game models like machinima, as well as the big budget cinematics that definitely steal the show. You're never really stopping to read long text, it's just kind of shown to you through the events that you're going through. I will say that PoE story showcasing has improved as I've gone, but I think it's one of the weaker points as a new player. Just like one other quick topic, the way they name things. In PoE, multipliers and additive damage are referred to in these incredibly vague ways. Multipliers are called more damage, and additives are called additional damage, as a clear example. I've no clue why it isn't more clearly stated and shown. If people weren't telling me this, how would I have known? There's just this wall of ways Diablo 4 is clear about the numbers and what they mean and what it should do, though I will say a lot of it just doesn't work as intended, and they're slowly fixing that as well. But you know what, at this point, I'm not going to keep going. While there's more topics I could talk about, I think I've made the point now, so let's conclude this talk. Diablo 4 is designed for a player to enjoy as much as possible, as fast as possible, but I do think it falls off pretty hard. Season 2's done a lot to address that. The endgame is a lot better, but it doesn't change the core way that Diablo was designed. They're having to twist it and improve it, but there's still a lot of aspects that are massive issues they've still not resolved. Big balance problems, whole sections of a class that still don't work properly. I've made different videos about the walls of issues in Diablo 4. Meanwhile, Path of Exile is designed for a player to enjoy long term, meaning it does have a much slower, awkward start and maybe a less engaging storytelling format and systems that are overwhelming and quite hard to understand without lots of, research and testing and so on. But it all builds and builds on top of itself, leading to what is an incredible experience as you progress more and more. It seems to never end, it just gets better every time I play it. They've kept the game successful and hyped for over a decade, and that's obviously no accident. I felt that Diablo 4 died with Season 1's pre-patch where they really messed up, and they've been kind of trying to revive themselves ever since. Season 2 has been a great start towards that point, but Season 3 has really high standards to achieve that again, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it. Diablo feels like this on a knife's edge kind of scenario, while PoE feels like a thought out, well-structured, and fully functional game. Like a house built on strong foundations. They've earned the position they're in now. Diablo 4 is like a house built on sand that they're desperately trying to shore up, and they shouldn't have built here. So I think Diablo 4 is a better short-term experience, more welcoming because it allows for fun faster, but PoE is the clear winner in the long term, and I'd recommend it if you're remotely interested in ARPGs. If you're just a casual player who just wants to play an IRPG, and you're not going to go to 100 or 1,000 hours, you'll just try the main things and move on, well, in that case, it might be the winner for you. But my journey with PoE continues. I can't wait to see what else it has to offer and eventually sink my teeth into that endgame. Maybe when I do that, I'll be back to talk about it more, but let me know your thoughts on the topic. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.